round 5 of the season, 2023 season, at the unforgiving Le Mans circuit. And boy, did we get a bit of a spectacle over the course of the weekend. Now, as per usual in these post-weekend Fallout videos, everything that I'm going to talk about is going to be time-stamped below. Skip ahead to whatever you like. Otherwise, we will be going in weekend's chronological order. But first, just a quick point on the 1000th Grand Prix weekend. We had our biggest ever MotoGP crowd over a weekend. The atmosphere at this Grand Prix looked absolutely incredible. I'm kicking myself a little bit because I did have this one penned down as one that I wanted to go to at the start of the season, and I wasn't actually able to make it work for me. So I wasn't there, but I was supposed to be. So a little bit of, well, more than a little bit of regret there on my behalf, but it did look like a lot of fun. It looked like a good weekend. And just quickly on that, I know it's the 1000th Grand Prix event, and, you know, obviously that probably brought in more people than we would normally have got at this event. And sometimes this Grand Prix, I don't know why it happens, what it is with this little part of France there where they get the weather at this time of year, but often a rain interrupted one can keep crowds away if the weather doesn't look good in the lead up. And while there was the prospect of rain at the start or during the week before the weekend started, it didn't eventuate, and it looked as we got closer to the weekend that the weather was going to hold off. And that probably brought in a few more people. But just a quick point, and it's something I did hear on the commentary during the feed over the weekend, is that apparently it was free parking and free camping. The price is right. I mean, maybe a lesson to some of the other promoters that you don't have to just try and gouge every penny out of everyone every time they go to an event. Just get the ticket prices. Once they get in, they'll buy food, they'll buy booze, they'll buy, bottles of water, whatever it is, if it's a hot day. You will make your money. You don't need to squeeze everything out of everyone for every little thing. You'll still make your money, and the benefit is you get more people through the door. So yeah, just a quick point I wanted to make because this is a big one for me, and I've done a video on this before. Link above, about why this is a big factor for MotoGP crowds. And you know what? Just they've done the right thing here, and it looked like just the best event for years. Obviously, we've had COVID and stuff for years and stuff like that. So this is a pre-COVID type event we just had in terms of the atmosphere. So it was good to see. Now, as I said, we're going to be moving chronologically through the weekend. Of course, that means we're starting on Saturday with the sprint race. And of course, the first point you have to make is Jorge Martin was exceptionally impressive in this race. And he looks like he maybe has unlocked something. We saw him do well on Sunday in the Grand Prix as well, and we'll obviously talk about that later. But he's found something. He's unlocked something here because and I don't know if it is maybe just in his head or if it's just a natural progression for him as he gets older, becomes a year wiser and more experienced. Just this, it was a little crash prone. And in this year where, last season when it was the year where he was really fighting for the factory ride at Ducati, and he was beaten to it by the better man in the end because, Bastianini proved that he had so much speed and an ability to win races, which is a big point. Now, Martin, he became a little crash prone. I don't know if it was the pressure or if it's just that's where he was in his development. A little crash prone. And while he always had the speed, and he's so good over a lap, it all really does look like sprint races were going to suit him. He hasn't quite shown up in all the sprint races this season, but it looks, like I said, he's unlocked something in his own head where he knows to just keep it on two wheels with speed, and he pushed on and grabbed himself a win here and a really good podium on Sunday. Brad Binder second in the sprint, so he's looking a sprint specialist. And I say that not to take away from his Sunday ability, which we know he's nearly unparalleled in being a Sunday man, but he looks good on any kind of race distance, even a shortened race distance. He seems to be able to find something. He doesn't have to qualify well. We know that's not been his strength ever, but he really is a race man. And there's something to be said about maybe sacrificing, just going for outright speed in practice and stuff like that. And I don't know what it is, if it is something they're consciously trying to do, sacrificing maybe one lap pace for at least a race distance, a sprint race distance or whatever. Now, look, it didn't turn out for him on the Sunday. I mean, a bit of a blip, I would say. Put it down to that, but his Saturday form is unbelievable, and he's picking up loads and loads of Saturday points. Yeah, whether it is a conscious thing where they're trying to be a race, he maybe has something where like I don't give a shit about qualifying. I just want to get the race result, which is what everyone should be doing, really. I mean, it is tempting to just want to go fast all the time and see how fast you can go and just really belting out, setting up the bike so that you can belt out an absolute banger of a lap. What good is that if you're going to go backwards and 2 races a weekend? If you're going to go backwards twice in a weekend, then what's the point? There is no point. And aside from that, in the sprint, we did have good battles through the field. Early on, we had battles, I think it was for podium, maybe 3rd place, 4th place. between Marquez, Bagnaia, Marini was in there, Vinales at points, and Binder came through that group to then break away to come second. It was a good race. It was a good race. I really enjoyed it. Now, as we are moving through the weekend in order, that means that the first time ever we're going to have Moto3 and Moto2 races to talk about early in the video rather than at the end like we normally relegate them to, but we're going to talk about them right now. Moto3, Danny Olgado. I mean, the only word that came to mind as I was watching the race, and then the only thing I've been able to think of since to talk about is just control. It was just full control from Danny Olgado throughout that race. He knew he wanted to be on the front. It's like he had this plan set out from the start. He knew who was going to be behind him. He knew Sasaki was going to be there, and he knew how he was going to deal with him. It was masterfully ridden. For a young man, it's very impressive. So we get a young guy that just decided, I'm staying at the front today. I'm leading this one from the front. I'm not, sometimes Moto3, it's going to be completely different in Mugello, right? You have to have a different strategy in Mugello, and I'm sure he knows that. You can't do this in Mugello because of the straight, right? You get swamped, you end up ninth by the end of the straight or something stupid like that. But when you're on circuits like this where you can control the race from the front, and every time Sasaki went to nip in front of him, nipped him back straight away. Every single time. It was almost like watching like Rossi back in the day when someone would go past me just like, oh, no. I'm just messing with you today. I'm not happy to just sit here and watch you do your thing and then maybe try and get a late pass in the last lap or whatever. He knew he didn't have the pace to get away from him, but he did know he had the ability to stay in front of him every chance he got. And he was actually relentless with it. And it was really, really impressive. I was really impressed. And he's taken proper control of the championship title fight now. With Diogo Moreira slipped up this weekend for probably the first time of the season, he has given a buffer now to Olgado. And not to say that it's over, because, inconsistencies will creep in. Not everyone's going to be good every week. Even Danny Olgado is as good as he was this weekend. And we know it's a bit more of a lottery when you get to Mugello in terms of where you position yourself coming into the final lap and things like that. With that, DNF, Moreira has sort of put himself in the second place battle with Ortola. I think Macia's in there. Even Artigas, although I don't think he has the outright potential to go on and challenge for the title. He is in that. When you look at the points, he is right there. So he's left himself in that scrap a little bit. Now, I'm not expecting Daniel Olgado to finish every race this season. I think all of these guys, especially Moto3 level, everyone's going to drop a point somewhere. Definitely not over for these guys that are sort of that 20 odd points behind, 20, 30 points behind. But I'd certainly rather be where Olgado is now than Moreira after that little slip up. So we'll see how that goes. But it's all shaping up very nicely in Moto3, and I'm looking forward to Mugello, even though it is an absolute shit show in Moto3, so it's going to be fun. It's going to be fun. Moving on now to Moto2. Interesting one. We had a red flag incident earlier in the race, so we got a shortened race. It was a bad incident. A lot of bikes just flying all over the place there for the one that brought out the red flag. Unfortunately for Sam Lowes, he'd already gone down at that point, and didn't make it out while the pit lane was open, so I had to start from the back. Now, I mean, a lot of talk about, oh, that's really unlucky and stuff. Well, he did crash, so he's lucky to be in the race at all. So, but yeah, I do think he probably had pace to really challenge Arbolino in this race, because they just looked well set up for this weekend, the Mark VDS boys. They something was clicking for him and they were doing well, and Arbolino showed it. He really was impressive in this race. And every time you think to yourself, right, this is where Pedro cracks on. He's the class rider in the field, right? He's on the bike that always wins the championship. He's the class rider in the field. This is where he sort of shows Arbolino that while Arbolino is an A rider, Pedro's an A+. Pedro slipped up here again. Pedro has slipped up. Interesting. Look, it is the kind of circuit, we said it was unforgiving. It does bite. And we'll talk about that later on when we talk about MotoGP with the amount of crashes that we had. But this circuit does bite, and it can catch you out. And I guess this is just one of those things where he probably didn't know much about it. Can you ride within yourself a little bit there and just be like, Tony's done me today? And I know he probably thought he was good enough to win that race. He probably did have the pace to go win that race. He probably had the pace to at least be, in the fight come the latter stages. But Arbolino was really good, and he's looking extremely consistent. And the worry for Pedro here is he's not up against someone like himself in a sense, and I'll explain what I mean there. He clearly has the outright pace over the most amount of circuits and the most amount of talent to go and be at the front, competing for the win at more places than Arbolino probably does. But Arbolino is a relentless, consistent finisher, and when the opportunities are there, he takes them. So when the win is on, he gets it. Any opportunity, like if he's going to finish that many races, and Pedro needs to sort this out, where sometimes he's going to be quicker than you that day, but he's given up a 25-point lead now, Pedro. So it's with a full race win lead, it'd be interesting to see what Arbolino can do. And I think he's going to go a bit like Iagura last season, where he'll know he just needs to keep scoring because he's got the buffer now. Just keep scoring. If you're quick enough to be on the podium that day, maybe you could go for the win, but are you risking binning it? I think he knows that that's not the way he wins the World Championship, by just trying to out-duke Pedro 1v1. Pedro's going to be just too good for you some days. Arbolino, I think he's got a good head on his shoulders. I think he knows that is the consistency that's going to get him a World Championship here, and not trying to beat everyone on any day, which is what Pedro's going to try and do. I can feel it because he knows he's the best guy out there. But yeah, good race. Enjoyed it. So finally, let's move back to MotoGP, our Grand Prix on the Sunday. First point, obviously, is that Bezzecchi was the absolute class performer there. It'd be interesting to see if Pecco had stayed in the race, because his late pace on the Saturday race looked like he was starting to come at the leaders. And obviously, because of the short race, that's it. It's over. You finish third there. But over a full race distance, was he going to be able to just keep chipping away, and have really good pace? Bezzecchi was so far ahead in the end that you could argue maybe there was no one catching him anyway, but you never know. So he was absolute class though, especially after he didn't have a great sprint race on Saturday. But again, I've made this point before where maybe the sprint race on the Saturday gives you a first look at things, and then you can be like, I know what to do tomorrow. I know what to do. Whereas though some of the guys above are probably just thinking, just do the same thing again. Where does that come from? Maybe just having a look at things and making changes that if you're the winner, you're not trying to chase that speed there because you're thinking, well, I've got the speed. I'm not going to risk changing anything. I'm just going to try and do that again. Bez has done something different there. And is he a championship contender? And if he's not, then is anyone? I guess that's the question we've got to ask ourselves here. He's 1 point behind. This for the first, Bagnaya's slipped up again. Not his fault this time, I wouldn't think. And we'll talk about a few crashes later, but I don't think it was his fault. It's not like he's thrown this one away. There's contact and there's an incident. So, but is his inconsistency? His inconsistency is what's keeping people in the title race here. When I look at Bezzecchi, do I realistically think he is a title contender? I mean, harshly, I want to say no, because I think over the course of the season, even if he does pick up a few more wins for the season, or even if he finishes on the same amount of wins as Bagnaia, over the course of the season, is Bagnaia got more podium running pace across the next 15 Grand Prix? Probably he does, than Bezzecchi does. Is he going to keep crashing? I mean, the only thing that, let's be honest, the only thing that's keeping Bezzecchi in this title race is the fact that Bagnaia has crashed so many times. Do you expect that to keep going for Bagnaia, where he only finishes, 3 out of every 5-6 Grand Prix? I have to think that has to stop at some point, and I do think it will stop at some point. A bit like last season, he just sort of got his head down and figured it out. But he did that when there was nothing to lose. This time he has everything to lose in the fact that only he seemingly can cost him the World Championship. So is Bez a title contender? I know it's harsh, but I still think no. But tell me what you think. Is this it? Is it these two going for the title this season? It's going to be like this for the rest of the season. Bagnaia is going to be really inconsistent with crashes. Bez is going to pick up wins when he does crash, and then he's going to stay in it right to the end. I personally think the bigger title contender might be Brad Binder. And I know he didn't have the best Sunday this weekend, but the man is relentless. He's a relentless, consistent finisher near the top. I think just purely for the fact that he's not on the same bike as Bagnaia is what makes him a title contender. Because I think with Bez, just by virtue of being on a Ducati as well, and an older Ducati, by the way, it just means that the advantage is always going to be in Bagnaia's favour. There's no difference that can help Bez get an advantage. Whereas the KTM, I know it's probably not as good a bike as the Ducati, especially the factory one. Does it at least give him a point of difference in some areas, or maybe in the sprint race or whatever, where he can have a bit of a difference to Bagnaia and be a title contender? That's the way I'm seeing it. So I still think the more serious title contender might be Binder. Yeah, tell me what you think, because it is an interesting one. Is there another title contender? Even just a point behind. Is anyone still another title contender? Now, while we are talking about Binder and KTM, I want to make a point on Jack Miller. Now, as an Australian, my hopes for the last 10 years have been hitched on Jack Miller to be our next world champion. It looks less and less likely every year that could be the case, although there was a bit of hope this year when all of a sudden KTM's come good, and he's been a big part of that. He's showing his level of speed on a KTM that we haven't seen almost ever. I mean, they've obviously had a couple of good races here and there in certain seasons and been really quick in certain Grand Prix, but Jack is showing speed at every circuit. So he's a big part of what's making them a more serious contender. But the more you see of Jack, the more these inconsistencies become a bit of a worry. And then you start to wonder, is it ever going to work out for him? And I did mention Binder as a title contender just now because Binder is showing what it is that Jack doesn't show in that sense. Where this weekend, Jack has had an absolute nightmare. He can look the quickest guy all weekend and end up on no points. How is that happening? Now, look, something obviously went wrong in this race on Sunday where he lost a lot of confidence in, I'm thinking it must have been the tyres and the grip. Something fell away from him. And then right when Binder had caught up to him and they'd met in the middle, where Binder had a slow start and came up and he'd had a lightning start and gone back, and their pace had just leveled out at each other. And they probably were going to finish line astern there, one after the other, 7th or 8th position. Although with guys going down, it probably would have ended up 6th and 7th position or something like that. And Jack still hasn't kept it up. Even if Binder goes round you there and you have to settle for 7th or 8th, you've not left points on the table at least. Now, Jack always gets to end a season, and because I follow him so closely, I'm always looking at what could have been with him. And he always ends up in these finishing positions where you think to yourself, well, if he picked up 20 or 30 more points, he was a title contender to the end, and maybe he wouldn't have got over the line in the end, but he was finishing top 3, top 2, if he'd not just picked up those extra 20 or 30 points. And when you look at race weekends like this, and you look at Austin, that's already 20, 30 points that he could have picked up. And I'd love to see the statistics on how many times Jack Miller has crashed from podium positions over the years, because it is one of those things where you can back him in all you want, but you can't hide from the fact that he leaves so many points on the table that Binder does not leave, right? Binder's had a struggle there that, he's had a tough Sunday. He got beat up early in the race. He fell behind and he's ended up just having to fight his way through and be like, look, it's a salvage job here, and ended up, where did he finish in the end? 6th. And Miller was ahead of him when he went down. So, and look, while it's not ideal, when you were leading the race and what could have been, you've got to keep the bike upright. You've got to. Even if you have to concede another couple of positions there, concede them just because you don't have the pace to keep up. It's fine. Bank the points. A guy like him, when you look at his points at the end of the season and you think, oh, he could have finished X in the championship, it's always these 20 or 30 points that you think, well, what if he just picked them up? And then you look at the results where the races where he did drop the points and the positions he was in, it starts to look damning. And I hope he can turn around from here for the next 15 Grand Prix, if he can just take these points and bank them the way Binder does. All of a sudden, we're talking about Binder as a title contender, and we're not talking about Jack. And Jack's had more speed than him all season. It's just one of those things. I get maybe that's just what you get when you get Jack. You get a super quick guy that is inconsistent, but he needs to sort that out. No one can sort that out for him. And while we're talking about orange bikes, let's talk about Honda and Marc Marquez actually running the Kalex chassis. We've actually seen it race in the flesh now. There was mention that there was a bit more feel in the bike and, maybe it wasn't as good in this area, but it's given them something in another area. Is that where Marc's good weekend came from? He had a good result in the sprint and ran at the front until he crashed in the Grand Prix on Sunday. So did the Kalex chassis give them anything? To be honest, I don't think it did. Results-wise, I think Marc was probably going to do that anyway. But if he's saying he's going to get a certain feel out of it, then that's something for them to build on. It's definitely worth going in that direction then. I don't think any of the other bikes ran that chassis. I'm not sure if Mir did. I didn't hear anything about it. If he did, it doesn't matter because he doesn't finish races anyway. And we'll get to Mir because it's starting to get a bit ridiculous now with him. And I'm pretty sure the LCR bikes wouldn't have run it. I think Rins may have ran it in practice just for the sake of running, to get a feel for it and probably Honda wanted to get his thoughts on it, but obviously had to give it back for the race so that I don't know how many of these chassis they actually have with them or however it works. But look, Marc, I think had a good weekend for his return. Joan Mir, my God, you can make excuses for people, but it's silly. It's just silly. What is he expecting here? I just feel like you're at a point now where it's just come last if you have to. Do not crash that fucking bike. What are you doing? Just stay on it. For a guy that won a world championship just by being a relentless finisher, he just finished enough races. He never had the speed. He only won one race that season. He never had the speed, elite speed, that you usually see from a guy who wins a world championship. He did it by being relentlessly consistent. Now, some credit has to go to the bike here, but we have seen decent performances out of Honda riders this season. Surely, as bad as a bike could be for you to ride, you could at least stay on it for half the races, like come 13th if you want. And I think there's a really interesting comparison here, and that interesting comparison is Franco Morbidelli, where Morbidelli on that Yamaha obviously has no feel, and we know that Morbidelli has been class in the past. Like that year that we mentioned Mir's World Championship, he was clearly quicker than Mir that season. Where you see Morbidelli sort of slow a lot of the time, he brings it home. And even this weekend, he's picked up a top 10 finish in the Grand Prix by just staying on it and being like, look, we need our riders. You know, it doesn't help him or anyone if he goes down every single race because he's trying to keep up with, the riders ahead of him. He's quick when he can be, and if he's not, he just, well, that's it. Whereas O'Meara looks like the only reason I can think of that he's crashing so much is that he's trying to push the bike at certain times in races. So he's like, oh, I can start pushing now, whatever it is, and just going down. It's like, well, obviously you can't. You're crashing every single race. Like, it's actually ridiculous. And he's really at risk. I mean, you talk about like, oh, you can't see them swapping riders and stuff mid-season. Well, how long do you put up with this for if you're Honda? And I know Rins didn't finish that race either, but Rins at least is showing a little bit more. And at least staying on it more often. And for a guy that's supposed to be the opposite between these two, Mir was supposed to be the consistent one that stays on, and Rins was the crasher that was a little bit quicker. But now Rins is a little bit quicker and he doesn't crash as much. So it's like, what are you getting from Mir? What are you paying him for now? He's not earning his coin for Honda. Because even in a testing sense where it's like, oh, let's get some data, he's not staying on the bike anyway. And just while we're on Honda, I mean, we mentioned Rins briefly there. Taka Nakagami had a really good weekend, I thought. Under the radar. And when I say really good, I mean, he never really picked up any great results over the weekend, but picked up a top 10 result on Sunday and actually finished on track as the second best Honda on Saturday. So, he beat Mir and Rins to the line on Saturday. So you talk about guys that are just like, they're on the way out. I think Taka, and there are points in certain weekends where I have seen it in qualifying, in practice, in the run into qualifying, where he has been the second quickest Honda at certain points over weekends. A lot of time in the races he'll end up falling behind the likes of Rins, but he's doing as good a job as anyone other than Marquez on that bike when you think about it. I mean, I know Rins picked up a win, but exceptional circumstance being that everything just clicked for him that weekend. And I don't think Taka has that in him where Rins does. When you just look at like you're doing a job for Honda, they can see why they love him. The guy, he works hard, he gets his results, he finished there on Saturday, second best Honda, and he's finished in the top 10 on Sunday when everyone else is. He's the only Honda that finished the race. They pick up no points without him this weekend. And I briefly mentioned Morbidelli. It was a tough weekend for Yamaha, and I've written it down here, dire weekend, but don't know if I necessarily think it was as bad as the word dire would suggest. Saturday was awful for them. Fabio was running well-ish, but didn't finish the race. And then Frankie was nowhere. Finished wherever got him at 13th, 15 seconds off the lead in 12 laps or something. So not great. Sunday, a little better, where they did end up with two bikes in the top 10. Now, obviously, hugely crash affected, but on a circuit that is unforgiving when it comes to making slight errors, they were good enough to both stay on it and finish in the top 10. Fabio had a decent result in the end. At a place where you'd expect, with Fabio's determination to do well there and his ability at that circuit and how well he knows it, on a bike that used to be good at this kind of thing, to be where they are is very worrying. But do I still think they're in a better place than Honda? Maybe when you look at the other three Honda riders, except for Mark. It's just whether or not this Kalex chassis gives Honda something where Yamaha don't look like they're really making any steps. It's just going to be like this for the rest of the season. I mean, they're duking it out for worst bike on the grid, really, and 6 of one, half dozen of the other with them. But yeah, I mean, Fabio will be disappointed. He did pick up 7th in the end. It's a good result for him in the end, considering the weekend they've had. This is a long video this week because a lot happened. There's a lot of guys to talk about. The crashes. Now, this circuit, fine, you could put it down to the circuit because there's always a lot of crashes here. We always have a very low number of riders finish this race, and we've had 13 finish here. If you stayed on, you got a point this week. In fact, you got more than a point. Jonas Folger, 13th, few points for him. I would normally just put this down to Le Mans, but we saw the same thing at Kota, and again, tough circuit, quite unforgiving surface, so maybe it's just that. But I don't remember, I mean, maybe it's always been like this. Maybe it has always been like this, where you get a lot of guys go down over, in races and over a weekend. I don't know if I remember it necessarily being like this from when I was younger. were MotoGP always just crash fests? Someone jump in the comments. I'm going to have to look back through some old race results and see if there was a lot of times where we had a lot of crashes. But are guys on the edge more now? Are guys on the limit more now? Maybe. I don't know if necessarily the aggression of the riders has changed. It does feel like there's a lot. I mean, it's only because the stewarding is the way it is. It makes it feel like the guys are being really aggressive all the time with people always getting penalties and stuff. But we just didn't used to penalise it. And then an incident would happen and you'd forget about it 2 corners later because it wouldn't matter. So are guys being more reckless? Are guys pushing to the limit more? Are we on the edge more with these bikes? So everyone's like really... Back in the day, did people just go, I'm coming 7th today. That's it. I'm not going to do any better than that. And just ride around there. Whereas now they're like, I'm actually going to push like crazy to try and finish 5th. Is that what's happening? Or is it always been like this? I can't remember. Let me know. But that could be the case. And on a few of those crashes, I mean, the Pecco-Mav one racing incident, and I think it was put down as that, thankfully. If I had to lay blame anywhere, I'd probably was leaning towards Mav because he's made the pass. He's gone a bit wide, and it looks like they look like they're in a bit of each other's blind spot there. He'll say Pecco didn't give him the room, but the only rider that changed line was him. He came from outside of the right-hander to then move. He was on the inside of the left-hander, but moved across to give himself the angle to tip in. And that's where the contact got made. It looked like Pecco came out of that corner, straightened up, and held his line more than Mav did. Mav looked to sweep across to give himself the angle to get into the turn. So I think that's where the contact came from. If I had to lay blame somewhere, maybe it's in that. I'm not laying blame on anyone here. This is a racing incident. 2 don't go into 1, and they both wanted the same piece of road. The Marini-Marquez incident, Alex Marquez, was a bit scary. Your heart's in your mouth a little bit when there's a guy on the road, and thankfully they all did really well to avoid him, and he got off the road nicely. But that was an unfortunate one where Marini actually saved it, but saving it has just... He needed there to be no one behind him. That incident happens with no one behind him. He saves it. He loses time. He cracks on. There's just 2 guys right there, and one of them is blindsided by the virtue of the fact that he's behind someone. So it could have easily been Bez that he took out there, but it wasn't. And look, a lot happened this week, and this is a long video for us here. We're back on the long form stuff here. So much to talk about. There were some good performances. Obviously, we don't get to talk about everyone in these videos, but, some honourable mentions. I thought Johan Zarco was really good on Sunday, deserved his podium, and it was nice to see a Frenchman on the podium when the French have made the effort to turn out and make it the biggest Grand Prix crowd of all time. So brilliant for them there, had something to celebrate. And I thought Augusto Fernandez was good on Sunday, although it wasn't great on Saturday, but had a really good, he's finished really strongly there in 4th position. Well done to him. So a couple of honourable mentions there that we didn't really get to talk about in detail, but that's it. It's another weekend over. We've got a few weeks off now before we head to the incomparable Mugello, and always Mugello, one of the great events in Grand Prix racing, any form of it, any form. So I hope there's a big crowd there. I hope they've sorted out their ticket pricing and things like that, because they were under fire for pricing people out of attending in previous seasons, last season especially, without Rossi there as well, and people just didn't care for it, and nor should they be willing to pay that kind of money. So I hope that they've learnt from what's happened this weekend in Le Mans, and they're going to price accordingly for that event, because I would love to see a bumper crowd there. There's nothing better than Mugello in full force from the Italian fans. That's what we want to see. So we'll see you on that one there. So I will link to my Substack down below. You can find that in the description. Make sure you hit the like button as you go on past there, because it does help us out a lot. And if you'd like to keep watching, I'm sure you might enjoy one of these videos that's on the screen for you right now. Make sure you click on one of them and have a look. And otherwise, we will see you on the next one. Cheers.